right. It is 1 o'clock, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started here just to respect everybody's time. Thanks everyone who's joining today. My name is Dana Lehman. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator for the Town of Crested Butte, and it is with so much excitement that we are launching the planning process for our 2030 Climate Action Plan. I am joined here today by Emily Artale, our wonderful guest speaker, and I will introduce her in full in just a few minutes. Really quick before we get started, I didn't include a slide about it, but just want to share some of the fun Zoom housekeeping items. First and foremost, the webinar will be recorded. We will be posting that on the Town of Crested Butte's YouTube page, as well as the 2030 Climate Action Planning page that we just put up. So keep an eye out for that. If you do have questions, we're going to save those until the end. I believe Emily and I have left enough time for a nice Q&A session at the end. Please, during the webinar, if you don't want to forget your question or it's something that we can potentially answer live, please include those in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. If you feel really strongly and want to come off camera or speak your question, we will happily let you do that at the end. We have the capability to let you show your video and ask the question live. So, okay. Well, I'm here to talk to you about the Climate Action Plan mostly, but first what I wanted to address, and Emily, next slide, please. Thank you, is what the heck is going on in Crested Butte? I know that many of you who live in the community or are engaged with the community in some way have been hearing the rumblings about all the planning that's happening in 2024 and the big effort that it's going to be. And I just really want to contextualize what that planning process looks like and how the Climate Action Plan fits in with that planning process. Next slide, Emily. Thank you. So these are the plans that are coming up in the next few years. And I just wanted to give some historical context to the Community Compass, which is our comprehensive plan at the Town of Crested Butte. And what that document really is an agreement between the community and council and town staff on how we make decisions and how we move forward with planning and projects for the community. And the most important piece for my role at the town is the 7th guideline for the Community Compass. Let me back up and say the Community Compass also gives town staff and council guidance from the community on what we were supposed to be planning. And so, Emily, next slide, please. For me, the most important one for my role is to act on the urgency of climate change and prepare for the changes we expect from it. And so now, next slide. In 2024, we are closing out the Transportation and Mobility Plan. We have kicked off the Historic Preservation Plan, and we are kicking off the Climate Action Plan. And these 3 plans are kicking off all at the same time because they're really interrelated. They have to speak to each other. In order to learn about how we move in the community, we also have to know what we want to preserve and what our period of significance is in this community. And then we also have to learn about how the Climate Action Plan tells us how to sustain the community. So this is what we're looking at in 2024. And the next step, next slide, please. Thank you. That we will kick off is the Strategic Infill Plan, and that's kicking off this year and will continue into 2025. And really, when we talk about how we move, what we want to preserve, and how we sustain this community into the future, informs the Strategic Infill Plan, which tells us how we want to build this community in the future. And ultimately, next slide, please, Emily. We are gearing up to do all this planning and preparing for our building code cycle update in 2026, where we'll be looking at design standards and guidelines, zoning and building codes in 2026 that will really inform the community how we build and how we're going to grow this community. Next slide. So I also want to address why we're doing a 2030 climate action plan. We have a really great 2019 climate action plan. And I commend Mel Yema for spearheading that project and making so much progress. But believe it or not, it has been 5 years since we wrote that plan, which is wild to me. And in the midst of that plan, we also experienced a global pandemic, which for most governments meant that they were focusing strictly on public health for a few years. And so many of the goals and projects that we anticipated in the 2019 Climate Action Plan, were delayed or were not seen just because of the road bump that was COVID. And we also it's time to measure our success and really get a sense for what we've accomplished in the 2019 action plan and what progress we've made. And we need to align and set new goals for our community at this point. There are new updated standards in the industry. There's even new greenhouse gas emissions protocols, best practices, and topics that were not relevant 5 years ago that are certainly much more relevant now. And I'm also really pleased to say that the 2019 Climate Action Plan had about 77 committed actions that the town said they were going to do. And even with COVID, we completed 64% of those, 64% of the tasks that we committed to are either complete, partially complete, or ongoing. So while there still is some work and some projects that will carry over into our 2030 goals, it really is time to start looking to understand how we can create deep, meaningful climate action with some new goals for 2030. Oh, next slide. Thanks, Emily. I tried to move forward. So without further ado, I want to warmly welcome Emily Artale, who is our guest speaker today. Most of you may know her. She is a local sustainability professional with some very significant climate action planning experience, as well as having a bachelor's and a master's in environmental engineering from CU Boulder. She founded Lotus Engineering and Sustainability. She is the vice president of the Gunnison Valley Climate Crisis Coalition, which is a local volunteer group. And she is currently a mechanical engineering lecturer at Western Colorado University, who's helping teach engineering students how to incorporate sustainable practices into their field. So without further ado, I will happily let Emily take over.
Great, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We're super excited to have you. As Dana mentioned, I'm Emily Artale, and I've been working in the fields of climate action and sustainability since the early 2000s. And I was asked to be here today to share with you what I've learned and observed through my career and how we can use climate action planning to really shape this future that we all want. Through my work, I've seen through this process, we can identify new resources for the future. We can improve our safety, our resiliency, and even improve equity. So sorry, my mouse is all over the place. So hopefully I'll fix the advancing of the slides. There we go. Okay, so before we get started, I really want to set the foundation of why we are all here today. So way back in the day, during the Industrial Revolution, we generally as a society made choices to improve our quality of life. We wanted to save time, bring flexibility, convenience, and we did that through the invention of machines and automating processes. And for most of us, this really did improve our quality of life. We had electric lighting, we had trains, planes, automobiles, all of the things. But it required a lot more energy. It required a lot more consumption of resources. And as a result, we also generated a lot more waste. And so unbeknownst to most of us, although a few of us did know about it, the consequences of these decisions resulted in some pretty catastrophic results. And so as a result, today, we are seeing our planet and people suffer. And many climate change experts would say we are on the verge of a sixth mass extinction because our global temperatures are too high. And our global temperatures are too high because we are generating too many greenhouse gas emissions, primarily from energy and from generating waste, from industry and some from agriculture. Now, this image on the right is a very famous one that I grabbed from NOAA, and they update this every year. And what it shows is the temperature differential between the year in question and a baseline. And the baseline they chose is a 20th century average. So what we can see is our planet has been getting warmer since the early 80s. The gray line shows our greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a direct correlation. So now we can confidently say climate change is happening, and it's creating these high temperatures, which in itself is a problem. I'm sure some of you saw the images of all of the heat related events last summer. One comes to mind for me. It was outside of the airport in Iran that showed temperatures. The heat index reached 145 degrees Fahrenheit. So clearly that provides a lot of challenges to people. But also what it does is it's throwing our planet and ecosystems out of whack. It's creating really severe weather events and unpredictable weather events. So for the first time in history, we're having climate refugees. We're no longer able to grow the food in the way that we have depended on for decades. Water availability is changing. And I used to work as a consultant for Maui County, and they told me that in just one season, they experienced record-breaking fires and flooding. So the IPCC, who's like the de facto international organization on all things climate science, said to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, we need to keep that temperature differential below 2 degrees Celsius. And ideally, it would stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. In 2020, our planet was 1.5 degrees warmer than the late 19th century average. And I just heard on the radio last week that 2023 reached 1.48 degrees Celsius. Now they cautioned we're not exactly at the tipping point yet because they'd like to see multiple years in order to make that declaration. But the take-home message is our planet is getting warmer. We haven't even reached the tipping point that IPCC says we need to stay below, and we're already seeing these effects globally and locally. So the image down on the left is from a ski resort in Europe, and this was taken in winter time. So this ski resort should look like ours, and it doesn't. And they had to close because temperatures were too warm. The middle image is from the Marshall Urban Wildfire. So this happened a couple years ago in December. Marshall is a very small town outside of Boulder, Colorado, and climate change created the perfect condition for a large fire. They had months of drought, unseasonably warm temperatures, and really high winds. And within a matter of hours, this fire destroyed 6,000 acres of land. So it spread from Marshall through Superior and all the way to Louisville. 1,000 homes were destroyed. And even a couple months ago, I met families that are still displaced and trying to figure out how to rebuild. The image down on the right is beetle kill on Monarch Pass. And I know this is one we're probably all really familiar with. Beetles will not survive if temperatures stay below minus 30 degrees. And we just haven't had that. And so the beetles are thriving and they're destroying our forest. So because our planet is getting warmer, in Colorado, we can expect more fires, droughts, vector-borne illnesses, and less and more variable precipitation, essentially more of the same. And not only are we seeing these effects on our environment and on people, but there's also some really big financial considerations. The Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, or CDPHE, has a really cool tool called the Avoided Cost Explorer. And it allows you to dive in and see what the financial implications are for different counties in the state and under different conditions. So I looked it up for Gunnison County. And it said that we could expect, if we were to amortize the money we were to spend between now and the year 2050, on responding to climate-related disasters, we could expect to spend about $18 million every year. So this is having significant effects on several aspects of our way of life. Now, I just shared a bunch of really gloomy, sad news with all of you. I'm sure it's nothing that you haven't heard before, but I thought it was important to just ground us all in truth and set the stage of what we're looking at. And I'd like to offer a way of looking at this information. So just like in the Industrial Revolution, where we were trying to improve our quality of life, I think we're in another phase of that. We're in this relearning phase of trying to keep our quality of life, maintain it, hopefully improve it, but in a way that doesn't cause so much damage to our planet and to other people. And I make this statement on a general mass global citizen level, recognizing that Indigenous people and other low impact individuals have been living like this for a very long time. But generally speaking, we all need to relearn how to do this. Fortunately, we know exactly what the problem is. We have decades of data. We have a lot of evidence so that we know what's happening. And more or less, we know how to fix it. And that's what the climate action planning process does, is it gets us into that fixing stage, and it helps us work towards that vision of the future that we want. And I think this is really exciting because with it comes innovation and opportunity. We're at the stage where we can figure out how to do things better. So I have a lot of hope in the future. And this is because of things that I have learned throughout my career that happened in the very recent past. And so I want to share some of those with you. So I want to acknowledge that it has taken an extremely long time to accept and acknowledge that climate change is happening. It's also taken a very long time for, mass society to commit to climate action. However, I think that is the second we commit, and I think we're at that stage right now, things can happen. And dramatic change can happen very quickly. Here's an image that I found. It was only 66 years between when the first airplane was invented and we put someone on the moon. I mean, that's certainly within a lifetime. And I want to share just a simple story of how I observed this in my career. So in the late 2000s, I was working for a firm in a smallish city in the Front Range. And one of my colleagues lived in the city, and that city forbid anyone from saying the words sustainability, climate change, or greenhouse gas emissions in council chambers. So my friend, being a climate activist, would go to these council meetings, and she would wrap herself up in layers and layers of black garbage bags to passively demonstrate the effect of greenhouse gas emissions on our planet. So fast forward 10 years, I was in a different role, and I had the opportunity to work with this community as a consultant. So 10 years later, they have the most ambitious renewable energy goal of anyone in the state, 100% renewable by 2030. And as far as I know, they were the first ones to commit to such an ambitious goal. They are actively electrifying new and existing construction. They are actively growing their electric vehicle infrastructure network, and they have the most robust climate equity plan of any community I've seen in our state. And to me, this just goes to show how far we can come in such a short period of time once we accept that there is a problem and we start to do something about it. And climate action planning is critical to this process. So it's through climate action planning that we do education, we do outreach, we build support, we figure out where we're starting from, we figure out how to reduce our emissions, we figure out how far we can go and what the future will look like. So this is an image that we put together for the City and County of Denver's 80 by 50 stakeholder plan back in the year 2017. So this is a bit like a climate action planning process. And in response, this is a public report out that Denver released a year or so ago that shows how they're investing in different climate actions. Now, I want to bring your attention to the first green bar. So through this process, we engaged dozens and dozens of stakeholders along the Front Range, and we modeled everything they said to us. And we determined that adoption of clean energy would yield the most significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions for the City and County of Denver. In response, on the right, you can see that in this year, they spent $17 million in renewable energy technology and started to grow their community solar offerings for income qualified households. So this shows the connection between planning and implementation. So the planning phase really informs the implementation phase. Now, I want to recognize that climate action planning is really new to most people. Unless you have recent degree in a sustainability related field from a university, it's unlikely that you've come across this topic before. So I want to dive a little bit in and explain what it is in some common terms. So I hear from some small communities like, why even bother? We're so small. We certainly don't have the impact that a large community or large company can have. And I want to offer two counterpoints to that. The first is, I really believe that if any of us are making an action or have a behavior that causes harm to anyone on our planet, we have a moral obligation to do better. So consider when you go to the gas pump and you fill up your car with gasoline. And first of all, I don't want to shame anyone here. Industry has given us very few affordable, accessible options. So that's what we're left with. So it's not your fault you have a fossil fuel vehicle. It is what it is. But when you go to the pump and you fill it up with gasoline, that has a downstream and an upstream impact. There's a film we're trying to bring to Crested Butte. It's called A Good Neighbor. And what it does is it walks us through the life of a family who lives under the shadow of Suncor oil and gas refinery in Commerce City, north of Denver. And it shows how their family suffers from the air pollution as a result of refining these fossil fuels. And because we consume those fossil fuels, I think we have an obligation to just first of all, acknowledge the impacts of our results, and then second, to do better. I also want to offer the perspective that our community has a large sphere of influence. We have a lot of visitors, a lot of second homeowners, and when we make choices about our actions and our behavior in this community, it affects them when they are here. It can influence the way that they think about their actions and their behavior, and then they can bring that home to their own communities. And I want to offer a quick example. Consider that NPR recently interviewed our mayor about the town's building electrification mandate for new construction. So here we are, this tiny town, and all eyes are on us because of the decisions that we made. At the time that Crested Butte made that decision, 45 other municipalities in the state were and are considering to do the same thing. And so now we're a leader in this, and they're looking at us to see how we are going to get this done. So here's an image, a really generic flow chart I put together of the climate action planning process. In reality, it is not this linear, and sometimes the steps don't even go in this order. In reality, it's cyclical, it's iterative, it's redundant, it's one step forward, two steps back. It can get kind of messy. But essentially what it is it's a series of data collection steps, quantitative data, qualitative data. It's a series of community and stakeholder engagement, and the end goal is change. So the end goal is never a report or a website or social media blast. Those are all things that support the process, but the end goal is change. It's working towards that future that we all want. So I'm just going to go into each step in just a little bit of detail. So at some point in the process, I usually do this early on, but it doesn't have to be. We identify what is important to our community beyond carbon. So we already recognize we need to reduce carbon. Honestly, it's not always on the top of everyone's list. It's probably somewhere in their list of priorities, but there's likely going to be other things that people are considering that are important to them. For our community, I would consider housing, affordability, access to recreation. And if we're able to combine these things with our carbon reduction strategies, we can start to really have a holistic planning process that creates a better quality of life for all of us and builds support. So somewhere else in the beginning of the process, this is usually step 1 or step 2, we also need to figure out where our emissions are coming from so we know where to spend our time. So the image down on the left shows a global breakdown of greenhouse gas emissions. And I don't share this with you so that you focus in on the individual numbers or the very small text. I just want you to see the pattern, and that is that energy dominates. I've done dozens of greenhouse gas inventories. I've reviewed a lot, and I've always seen this. This is always the case. A majority of our greenhouse gas emissions come from the combustion of fossil fuels, followed by other sources. So on a planetary scale, it's ag, industry, and waste. Now, it doesn't mean through the climate action planning process, we ignore all of the other sources. They are important. It just means that our biggest bang for our buck from a purely greenhouse gas perspective will be in energy. Now, the image on the right is the greenhouse gas inventory completed for the town of Crested Butte by Western in the year 2018. And it shows the same pattern. Most of our emissions come from buildings and surface travel means vehicles. And the source of those sectors is energy. Like you can see, I underline the legend below: electricity, gas, gasoline, and diesel. And I want to take a quick minute. So in my language, I don't use the term natural gas. The word natural was stuck onto the word gas to give the impression that it's not harmful. But natural gas or gas, it's essentially methane. So I remove that bias and I only use gas. So I wanted to clarify that in case you get confused as I continue speaking. So the third step is to identify how we reduce our emissions. And this is really the fun, exciting, innovative part. And fortunately, we have a head start. We've seen what other folks have done. We know from our inventories, the answer is we need to use less fossil fuels. And I lump together the strategies into these three larger buckets. So the first is we need to use less energy and drive less. So this means energy efficiency, weatherization in buildings, and this means, getting out of our cars, taking public transit, riding our bikes, walking, maybe electric bikes. Green the grid means using more renewables and electrify everything, which means replacing all fossil fuel consuming appliances and vehicles with electric versions. So in a home, this would mean instead of using a gas furnace, you would use an air source heat pump. And instead of driving an internal combustion engine vehicle, which is, your standard gasoline or diesel fuel vehicle, you would use an electric vehicle. And even though I've identified, we kind of know what we need to do, the climate action planning process helps us figure out how to customize this for what's most important to us. So for instance, to bring more renewables into our community, we could either build more community solar, we could subsidize rooftop solar, we could continue to support utility goals, we could write to the state and tell them to do some sort of mandate. I mean, there's a bunch of things that we could do. And it's through the climate action planning process that we identify those specific strategies. So I know in a large webinar like this, it's not always best practice to dig into the weeds, but I'm going to get into the weeds for just a couple things because I realize that some of this terminology might be new. And so the first one I want to talk about is greening the grid. So modeling tells us that the number one way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is by increasing the amount of renewables we use to generate our electricity. And let me tell you why this is. Our electricity is based on an energy mix of different fuels. So when they generate our electricity at the power plant, they combust coal, gas, and then they use renewable sources, in Colorado mainly solar, wind, and hydro. Back east, they'll include fuel oil, and other states include nuclear. Each of these energy types emits a certain amount of carbon. So when you combust coal, it emits twice as much carbon as when you combust gas, and renewables don't produce any carbon under this sector-based greenhouse gas accounting method, which is what this is all based on. And so when you change that energy mix, you change the carbon intensity of our electricity. So this is an image I took from Xcel Energy. And as you can see, in 2021, about 60% of their energy mix was based on fossil fuels, which produced a carbon intensity of 0.477 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents, which is just the unit we use to represent greenhouse gas emissions. And this is per megawatt hour of electricity consumed. So nearly all utilities that I'm aware of have made the commitment to increase the amount of renewables they're adding to their grid. So every year our electricity gets cleaner. So for Xcel in the year 2030, they plan on having 81% of their energy sources to be renewable, which reduces that carbon intensity. So that means if you were to flip on the light switch anywhere, the amount of carbon being released because of that action is lower than if you flipped on the light switch in the year 2021. And this is true for where we live too. We have a different utility. Ours is Tri-State, but it's the same thing. The other thing is electrifying. I see the word electrification all over, and it's probably because I'm pretty tuned into it, but usually when it's shared, it's very controversial, and it's usually very negative. This is because of legacy problems in the late 90s. This is because of fear of change, and this is because a lot of unknowns. From a carbon perspective, we absolutely have to do it. Next to renewable energy, it's the second most impactful way to reduce our carbon emissions. This is an image I took of our greenhouse gas footprint from Gunnison County. And it shows that 27% of our emissions come from gas used in buildings and gasoline used in vehicles. We can't lower the carbon content of fossil fuels. We can't change the chemical composition. So the only choice we have is to stop using these fuels and replace them with electricity. So modeling shows us because of the energy mix of our electric grid, it's cleaner today to use electricity for heating and cooling our homes, for really anything we're doing in our homes that requires energy, and for driving vehicles than it is to use fossil fuels. And now this was not always true. This was not true about 7 years ago. From the work that I've done, I saw the tipping point happen around the year 2020. But it is true today. And this is very important that we focus on electrification measures, because when you buy a furnace or a boiler or a car, you're committed to that thing for 10 to 20 years. And so that has a cumulative impact. So the sooner we can electrify things, the better. The other thing I want to talk about is mineral mining. So the way that we mine for rare earth minerals that power our energy transition, that power our cell phones, our computers, even jewelry, is really harmful. It has very large environmental degradation, which is, as I was told, one of the reasons we don't do a lot of this mineral mining in the United States is because our environmental regulations are too strict. And also other countries have, they're more resource rich than we are. And so it's done elsewhere. It has a really big social problem. A lot of mining leverages slave labor, child labor. Even under the best conditions, people are not getting paid well. They're not getting treated very well. And a lot of the production and distribution, so the people who hold on to these metals that we buy from, are other countries. I know China controls a lot of the mineral production. And so it creates environmental harm, social harm, and economic instability. However, mining, extracting, fracking, distributing, and combusting fossil fuels also causes harm. And we've been doing this for about 150 years. So this image on the left shows how much coal, oil, and gas that we extract with our de facto fossil fuel-based economy. On the right, it shows how much minerals that we are extracting for what we are entering into. It's considered, this new energy economy. And I want to pause there. It's not technically new because we've had solar and electric vehicles and all of these things for 50 plus years. They haven't been widely available to all of us. There's a great documentary called Who Killed the Electric Vehicle, if you're interested more in that story. But essentially, the coal, oil, and gas amount that we are extracting dwarfs the amount that we are extracting for the new energy economy. And fossil fuels are literally killing us on a global scale. The British Medical Journal said that air pollution from fossil fuels kills 5 million people every single year, and then multiply that by all of the years that we've been doing this for. And I'm really hopeful that because we're at the infancy of this transition, that things will get better. I know Tesla just released its first cobalt-free battery, and engineers are currently working on a sodium-ion and a sulfur-ion battery to replace the lithium-ion batteries that we use in cars. So we know exactly what we need to do. We need to conserve energy, green the grid, electrify everything. And now we need to be conscious of designing actions that holistically serve our community. Fortunately, when you do carbon reduction, it provides a lot of other fantastic benefits. So I made this slide purposely to inundate you with a lot of words and a lot of scary text, because I want to bring home the message that fossil fuels are literally killing us. They are harming us. The New England Journal of Medicine came out with a statistic last year, and it said 13% of all childhood asthma can be related to fossil fuel combustion devices in the home. And that even when not in use, gas stoves emit up to 21 hazardous air pollutants. And they went so far as to say gas stoves should be taken off the market because of the harm that they're doing to us. So for me, COVID didn't bring a lot of bright points in my life, but it did bring one cool thing. We were able to envision what our world would look like without fossil fuel combustion because we were on lockdown. So this is an image of a structure in New Delhi, India, just normal before COVID. And this is an image of the same structure during lockdown. So within 3 months, air pollution improved so much that you could clearly see the structure. And there's images like this all over the internet for different cities. This image on the right shows measured air quality pollutants for 3 cities that typically experience high levels of air pollution during the same time frame. What this tells us is that through climate action, we know to reduce fossil fuels. We reduce fossil fuels, we improve air quality, and by doing so, we will improve public health, all by doing the same thing. We don't have to do any extra work. Climate action also helps us improve our resiliency. By its very nature, we are contributing less to the problem. If there's less of a problem, we have less risk from it. Also, through climate action planning, we can start to identify actions that anticipate for, prepare for, adapt to, and respond to climate-related disasters. So I'm going to say something right now to me that's a little depressing, but it's also very true. I think for nearly all of us, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when we're going to be faced with a climate-related disaster. And I think we can just look to Lahaina, Maui over the summer. They weren't thinking that a fire was going to come and destroy their city center, but it did. And this is really important for our community, considering that we are one way in, one way out community with one lane on either side of the highway for most months of the year. If there were to be a climate-related disaster, we need to figure out some way that we're going to respond. There's 2 examples here that I shared with you. One is a community resilience hub. So think of this as like a community center. It's somewhere that people can access food, clean water, warmth, safety, shelter in the times of an emergency. This other one is a microgrid, which provides decentralized electricity to different sections of a community in case the main power plant were to go down. And if any of you were living here a few years ago, you might remember when the fiber optic cable was cut, and 17,000 of us were without internet for 24 hours, which was really a blessing. But like my phone relies on the internet. And if there was an emergency, we really had a lot fewer options. So these are things that we need to think about. And it's through this process that we can start to plan. Climate action by its nature also improves equity outcomes. The United Church of Christ reported that the racial makeup of communities is the single most influential factor in predicting the location of hazardous waste facilities in the United States. And in fact, our modern day environmental movement came from civil rights activists in the late 70s who were tired of living next to these polluting facilities. If you're interested in this topic, I recommend this plan. It's called the Austin Climate Equity Plan, and it does a really good job of making this link. It says climate action is directly connected to equity action. And let me walk you through a quick example. So for our most disenfranchised community members, for our under-resourced, lower income community members, they typically rent. And they typically rent substandard housing because the cost of that substandard housing is lower. But as a consequence, that substandard housing is typically less efficient. It has older appliances that are not as safe, that are emitting higher levels of those indoor air pollutants. And as a result, those community members typically pay higher energy bills. I was a consultant for the city of Pueblo years ago, and they said at that time, homelessness was primarily caused by energy rates. It wasn't caused by housing, it was caused by energy because monthly energy prices could get between $500 to $600 in the winter. And I haven't heard that high for where we live, but I've heard similar really high values. So with climate change, climate actions, we can go into these homes with the motivation of reducing energy. So we do energy efficiency, we do weatherization, we swap out old appliances with better, more modern, safer appliances. We're improving public health outcomes and we're lowering energy costs. So we're improving what's called energy burden. We're doing this locally. That's exactly what the GB Heat program does. And so when you thoughtfully design these actions, you can either expand them to include more community values, or just by their nature, they're going to solve other problems that our community is facing. And this is exactly what the town of Crested Butte is embarking on. They are looking at this vision of improving our quality of life by way of climate action planning. And great work is already happening. And I want to share this with you because I know it can be really hard to listen to the news and it seems like nothing amazing is happening, but there's a lot of great work that I've seen. And nothing that Crested Butte is doing is anything new. Nearly all major cities and companies and most smaller municipalities and companies have climate action resiliency plans. They look at them, they revise them, they update them, they evaluate them. They are starting to implement what I mentioned earlier, conserving energy, greening the grid, electrifying everything. We're also thinking about circular economy. So how do you use the output from one product and process as the input for another so that we reduce cutting down trees and we can maximize our resource use. We're looking at reducing life cycle emissions and embodied carbon. We're promoting regenerative ag. I mean, Cold Harbor Institute is doing this right now in Gunnison. We're looking at working towards 100% renewable. So we get our energy from GCEA, who gets their electricity from Tri-State. They recently committed to a goal of 89% reduction in carbon by the year 2030. So we're not at 100, but we're working our way there. We're promoting 100% electrification for new construction, and Crested Butte is leading the way on that. We're continuing to look at how to electrify existing construction, and we separate out new and existing because they're very different. New construction is easy-ish, existing is really hard, but it's still part of the puzzle. So we're trying to figure out ways to do that. We're actively electrifying all transportation. So I own an electric vehicle and I take comfort that I can drive it anywhere in our valley because there will always be charging infrastructure available to me. And that is thanks to GCA and the town of Crested Butte. We're working towards reducing our waste and towards zero waste goals. This was spearheaded, I know, by Sustainable CV, and the Gunnison Valley Climate Crisis Coalition is also looking at ways we can bring more composting into our valley. We're starting to talk about community resiliency. I haven't heard a lot of specific actions. I haven't heard anything about microgrids or resiliency hubs, but we recently did adopt the Wildland Urban Interface Building Code, which was informed by what happened in Marshall. And what this does is it includes fire mitigation measures within our current building codes. So the work is making a difference. The stuff we're doing is working. And I know that usually greenhouse gas emissions are going in the direction we don't want them to do. I just heard that for the first time ever, greenhouse gas emissions in the United States have decreased 2%. This is a really small number, and I know it doesn't get us near the 50% by 2030 that we were hoping. But as far as I know, this is the first reduction we've ever seen. And so it should be celebrated. It should give hope that at least we are all working to make a difference and these efforts are paying off. And I really believe that we're at this stage of relearning. We're working to do things better, and that with this committed action, emissions will start to go down over time. And this is why we need climate action, and this is why we need all of you, because this process is based on data and community input, and it's putting that all together to collectively come up with a plan that leads us to change. So if you would like to be involved, there's a lot of different ways. There's email, newsletters, notifications. And then as Dana said, there's some really great online resources that will be available on the town's YouTube channel and town's website. So that's all that I have. Thank you all so much for your time.
Emily, thank you so much.
Sure.
That was wonderful, and even I learned some new facts. And I just really want to highlight a few things that you mentioned about not placing blame. Right, we're all here recognizing that this is an issue, and maybe have questions around why it's an issue. But the important piece that keeps us from moving forward and creating meaningful action is placing blame on our other community members, our friends who don't act as we do, or who act differently than we do. And it can be a really big barrier of progress. So thank you for saying that. And I really appreciated how you brought people into climate action. I think some philosophies around climate action, like you spoke a lot to, is that we drive greenhouse gas emissions down, and that creates a huge impact. Obviously, it's the root of the challenges we're facing. But we also have to recognize that climate change is affecting people and people's quality of life and their public health. So I really appreciate you speaking so much to that. Thank you. And I'm hoping that we can bring that emphasis into the 2030 Climate Action Plan.
Great.
Thanks. Wonderful. Well, I know we're pretty well ahead of schedule here. So thanks, Emily. And I would love to welcome anybody with questions. As I mentioned earlier, the webinar will be recorded. I just want to repeat that. We're going to place it on the town website and the town YouTube page. But if anybody has questions, it looks like we don't have any in the Q&A box, which is where you'll place your questions if you have them. We also welcome you to speak your question to us. I can give you permissions to show your camera or adjust your microphone if you'd like to ask in person. So I'll let anybody jump in if they'd like. Frank, it looks like we've got a question from Frank Sandoval. We can send you copies of the slides, or the recording will be fully available. But if you'd like the actual slide deck, I'm sure we'd be happy to send that to you. Your registration information should be included with the Zoom webinar, so we can get it from there. All right, it looks like Nicole has a question. So it looks like I can allow you to talk. Nicole, you should be able to come off camera and unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. So thank you. That was awesome. My question is, especially since it sounds like Crested Butte's been a role model for some other municipalities, are there any municipalities out there that we can also role model off of? And if so, it'd be interesting if there was some kind of access to collective data on what other municipalities like our own are having success, and what kind of challenges that they have faced in the last, 5 to 10 years with their original climate action plans, and what adjustments that they have made. Just as data points of where we can go with some of this.
Nicole, that's great. And Emily, I can jump in and you can add if you'd like.
That sounds great.
Nicole, I think that's just a general issue, and actually one that I think Andrew was kind of speaking to with like regional efforts. One community I look at when I'm looking for ideas and that I think is really progressive is actually the Town of Crested Butte. Jessica Burley, I was getting her name mixed up, but Jessica Burley is the sustainability director there, and she is really progressive with programs and just really has like a can-do, we'll get it done attitude. And they've done some really great things around electrification, around the Plastic Pollution Reduction Act. The community of Frisco has also done some things. So they're a community I often look to that mirrors our own, being tourism and ski driven, really. But yeah, to speak to your first part of the question, Nicole, I think there really is a lack of like a hub for sustainability practitioners to say, especially within the mountain community. I won't make that blanket statement. I think there are some great resources out there for sustainability practitioners to reach out to each other and say, hey, we're dealing with this challenge, and what did you guys do that worked? But as far as the mountain communities, I think that there definitely could be some sort of hub or central research space where we can share information. But Emily, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, it seems like a lot of the mountain communities are facing really similar things. I went to a conference recently where someone said, if you live in a mountain community, you either own 3 homes or you have 3 jobs, which I know isn't, don't take that literally, but it's it's stating that we all are having similar affordability issues. We're all facing similar problems. And I know we've done work in Summit County, so the communities that Dana mentioned, High Country Conservation, HC3, they're the nonprofit who's there. They have a great wealth of resources. They just amended Summit County's climate action plan to include a climate equity component. And that was really cool to figure out how can we include more voices from the community that we typically don't listen to as much as we probably should. Telluride and Mountain Village have done some climate action planning recently, and they've come up with some really great ideas. Aspen, of course, is always it's one of the front runners in the state. I think some ways they have a little bit of different resources and means that they're working with, but there's a lot to learn from what they're doing over there. I worked with them recently on a embodied carbon analysis, and we were trying to figure out, was there a way to reduce embodied carbon of the materials going into new construction? So there are some interesting things that we can learn from some of our neighbors. And then I would also mention Park City. I know they're not in Colorado, but they are also leading the way. And the sustainability director there, his name is Luke Carton, started a conference called Mountain Towns 2030. And next year, I think it's in Jackson Hole. But one way to improve this collaboration, or at least for our behalf, maybe we could at some point get mountain towns to be here, and we get all of the mountain communities to visit us, and then we get to listen to everyone. So that would be kind of a pie in the sky idea, but maybe in future years.
Thanks, Emily. And Felita, thanks for also mentioning Mountain Town 2030. That totally slipped my mind. That is a really wonderful conference and a great gathering of now global mountain communities. And it's a great way to discuss problems in many sessions on what everybody's facing. I think maybe what I was more speaking to is like the in-between, you know, the continuous conversation of what everybody's working on as opposed to once a year. But thank you, Emily and Felita, for reminding me of that important resource.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Great. Does anybody have any other questions? I'm happy to give you permission to talk, or feel free to pop your questions in the chat. Let's see, I have a question here from Gabe. You mentioned electrifying existing homes is really hard. Is there anything in the climate action plan that addresses that for existing homeowners or condo buildings in the valley? Bigger cities have more resources and companies, block power in NYC, for example, but here it is really hard trying to electrify my home in CB South, but it's been nearly impossible to find anyone who has the know-how to do that in the valley, replacing old gas boilers with heat pump options, for example. I'm also president of Condo Association, interested in pushing this forward in an existing building. Gabe, thank you for bringing this up, and really important question. As Emily spoke a lot to, energy use is a big focus in the 2019 Climate Action Plan, and I will not be shocked if it rises to the top in our 2030 Climate Action Plan. We do have some programs for deed restricted housing, and I think the focus of that program is to help folks who create those deed restricted opportunities, either for themselves or as rentals, to do deep energy retrofits. It hasn't really been a part of the conversation yet on how we can expand rebates and programming to just general homeowners or the general population. I will mention that there's a lot of things coming out from the state and tax rebates that help just general homeowners do energy efficiency projects, but it's something we need to look at. This was a note from council that we've really focused a lot of energy looking at new construction. And so going forward, it might be good to start looking at retrofitting. So stay tuned, and this might rise as something that the Climate Action Planning Committee can help identify and help us figure out how we can create better programming for the general population. I think that answers your question, but let me know if you want me to follow up on anything, Gabe. Emily, do you have anything to add?
I just wanted to say that good for you, Gabe. This is super hard to do. It's not just hard in our valley, it's hard everywhere. I worked on the building electrification plan for City and County of Denver back in 2020. And it was interesting because at the end of the plan, there was about 6 of us on the call who really, really believe in this, right? We believe in this. And yet none of us could get it done. It was too expensive and we couldn't find anyone to do the work. So it's really challenging. On the bright side is that this has been identified as a really challenging topic. And there are people who are in our valley actively working to build workforce development. There's some training opportunities for contractors that the Colorado Energy Office is putting out and other organizations, and they're trying to bring them in. And so as our contractors get more familiar with electrification, hopefully the cost will come down, the ease, the fear will all get better. And it's not nothing unique to us. It's all over. And it's unfortunately, it's just happening. And I love that you referenced Block Power in New York City. That's so cool. They're a great model of how we could get this done.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, I missed the sentence in there about workforce development. So Gabe just want to also address some things that are happening in the valley. Like Emily mentioned, the Colorado Energy Office has really ramped up, I think, because there have been so many requests about folks not being trained and there's just not the labor force to do what we're asking. I mentioned this grant just a few questions ago to somebody who asked during the webinar, but regionally, the city of Gunnison, Town of Crested Butte, Town of Mount Crested Butte, and Gunnison County applied to a grant program through the Colorado Energy Office to offer some building code education seminars, specifically geared towards contractors to really help increase the labor force and their education around what we're asking them to do. So that's coming this year. But yeah, I hear you. That's a very common complaint, even from the folks who are helping us run these, the Green Deed program and GVRHA and those things. So thanks for bringing that up. Seeing a couple, maybe just comments here from Allie, and it's an anonymous person about Gabe. It looks like people are responding to you on some trainings and building code information. So I'll let you read those and use those as you like. Okay, it looks like Beth has a question about fossil fuels versus mining, and I'm trying to give a lot of space because I know that typing the question doesn't happen as quickly as just asking. So Beth, go ahead and let us know your question when you're ready. Yes, absolutely. Sorry, Beth, I'll do that. And just a reminder to folks, if you would like to be unmuted, oh, Beth, you do have your hands raised. Thank you. I didn't see that. Please raise your hand. Go ahead, Beth.
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah.
We hear you.
Sorry. My keyboard doesn't work very well. Emily, I had a question. You talked about kind of the impacts of fossil fuels, how they dwarf those of mining and extraction, right? Because I get that pushback a little bit. You know, that all the mining for all the batteries and stuff and the social and environmental impacts of those. Do you think that those two numbers of how the impacts are so much larger for fossil fuels right now is due to our use of fossil fuels, or actually due to the process of extracting fossil fuels versus mining? Can you speak to that a little bit more?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Do you mean?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Are you asking if the number is bigger because we're extracting more but not using as much? Or
yeah, is the number bigger because we use so much fossil fuels and the electric, you know, the industry isn't as big as the fossil fuel industry, or is it because of the process of getting gas is worse than the process of getting mining or of mining?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on mineral mining. I've just really dove into it a little bit in the last year. I do know that the fossil fuel extraction has just gone on for so much longer, and like a larger quantity is in the economy, but I don't know, like from an environmental standpoint, which has a worse impact. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Yeah, that is what I was asking. I think that's a really hard question to get at, or hard answer to get at.
Yeah, I mean, I had the statistic there, and the air pollution resulting from fossil fuels and how it has like a global reach. But you have that's a really great question, and I'm so sorry. I wish I could answer for you.
No, that's okay. I think it's just a good point though that you brought up when that does come up, because you get the pushback on the EVs for the batteries, but I think it's a really good point that we've been doing it in the fossil fuel industry for so long. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and hopefully the way that we're getting our minerals for the new energy economy will improve. I don't have any data to back this up. I have a friend who works on mineral mining on behalf of Indigenous communities, and she told me that they are thinking in the next 10 years, this will be less of a problem. But I haven't read anything. I don't have any data. That's one person's perspective that was shared with me.
Cool, thank you.
Great, thanks, Beth. Really, really great question, and one that I commonly hear and also wrestle with when we talk about promoting EVs and electrifying everything. It's a really challenging conversation that I just truly don't think has a great answer, but I think Emily did a great job addressing at least a piece of that.
Thank you.
All right. Beth, I'm gonna lower your hand if that's okay, unless you have another question, but, oh, good, okay, yes, hand went back up, maybe? No, okay, back down. Great, does anybody else have any other questions? I'm just gonna give a little space in case anybody's frantically typing anything. Maybe Emily, just because we're a little bit early and I want to give anybody just the last couple minutes to type in some questions or kind of ruminate, but I'll ask you, since you've worked with so many communities, maybe if you could give us a sense of like, what was the most like aggressive or just like impressive climate action thing that you saw in a community come to fruition?
Wow, that's a great. Okay, let me see if I can answer this. It's not gonna, I don't know if the answer is gonna really blow you away, but in my world, it really blew me away. So when we were working with the city and county of Denver, this was 2017. So realize we're barely into 2024. So this is like barely 6 years ago. We, like I said, we convened a lot of stakeholders, and these are experts in the field in the Front Range. These were, the top people and all the nonprofits, top people at Excel, at Energy Outreach Colorado. I mean, just all of these people. And we were sitting down, and no one had the golden ticket. No one knew, like, this is exactly what we need to do to reduce carbon emissions in the most impactful way. We were brainstorming it, and we collected, I think, 40 ideas, and me and another person modeled all of them using, good data, hodgepodge data, best guess assumptions. And then we came up with this list, and we prioritized stuff, and everyone's like, okay, that seems reasonable. And then 6 years now, we know, like, this has been repeat, like everyone is starting to do this. They're finding the same things. We now know exactly what to do. To me, this is just from not knowing to knowing in a matter of 6 years really blows me away. And each of those actions that we identified in Denver's plan in itself became a plan or a program. So like they had a green leasing program. That was one of the ideas that they came up with in 2017. Like maybe green leasing is the golden ticket, and it wasn't, but maybe. And they developed a program around that. They had you know, we were looking at changing the color of our roofs. We were looking at X, Y, and Z. And then one thing that was pretty incredible is that electrifying really came out on top. We called it fuel switching then. We didn't use the
Interesting.
term
Okay.
electrification.
Yeah.
And then they came out with this building electrification plan, and they're actively trying to figure out how to do this. And then they came out with the e-bike program. And I don't know if you all were following that, but the rebates that were available, we were also part of administering the rebates on behalf of Denver for the e-bikes. They sold out in a matter of weeks. And it was just
Yeah.
amazing. Like, wow, this is a really cool thing that people love. Like, I love seeing people out here on e-bikes. It seems like a really low-hanging fruit action that we could all take. And I think seeing that evolution and where we are today is just phenomenal. And you know, back in the day, it was a staff of 1. They now have a staff of 15. You know, they have different staffs. They have a transportation group, a buildings group, all these different groups. And I just worked with one individual at the time. So it just always blows me away how quickly things can change.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. And that really speaks to what you mentioned in the presentation about how change is suddenly exponential, right? Like we've spent many years just kind of scuffling around trying to figure out, but when we figure it out, it's like 6 years and it's just whoosh, the programs can go into place. We have staff, we find money. It can really happen quickly.
Yeah.
Frank asked a question, how can we participate and contribute to the 2030 Climate Action Plan? Frank, thank you for asking this question. We have a Climate Action Planning Committee who's really going to help inform and help us build the plan. And I was remiss earlier to not mention Brendel Group. They are a consultant that is helping us take community feedback, do our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and help us write this 2030 Climate Action Plan. So a huge thank you to them. Frank, please keep an eye out on the sustainability webpage, and I should say the subpage that is the 2030 Climate Action Plan page. If you want to actively go look for any public meetings, council meetings, we're still kind of planning some public engagement events, probably midsummer, in partnership with hopefully Mount Crested Butte, because they are also writing their climate action plan. If you want to be more passive and just hear about things, I encourage you to visit Crested Butte's Get Involved page. We have a newsletter, and we're creating a concerted planning effort between all the plans that'll really just passively let you know what's happening with not only the climate action plan, but the historic preservation plan, the strategic infill plan, and all the other planning efforts going on. So I would say keep an eye out for any of those public meetings. And as always, we welcome everybody to come to the council meetings when we do have sessions on the plans. So that's a great way to give public feedback. Let's see, we've got a couple extra questions. So Donnie asked, I hear a lot that this transition is expensive. Yes, the transition is going to cost money, but future decisions need to be based not just on the cost, but as well as the environmental health impacts. And thanks, Donnie, for that comment. Really trying to keep that in mind with the 2030 Climate Action Plan, because just like if you choose a gas boiler, you're committed to those emissions for the next 30 years, whereas if you invest in an electric boiler, you kind of get to see your emissions reduce as the green grids. Like those types of decisions are really long-range planning and help create better impacts in the future. So, and then Jeff, I think, also has just a comment, it looks like, but batteries are now more frequently being recycled. And as Emily mentioned, storage technology is rapidly evolving. Climate change is an existential threat impacting us globally and is disproportionately impacting the most disadvantaged folks around the globe. We will solve most of the environmental issues tied to the components of battery storage. Thanks, Jeff, for that comment.
Hey, Jeff, thank you for reminding us that batteries are being recycled. I neglected to say that. And I also neglected to really emphasize the disproportional impacts of climate change on our most disenfranchised community members. So thank you for bringing that up as well.
All right. And we have about 6 minutes left, and I'm just seeing questions trickle in, so I'm hesitant to end early. So I'm just going to give folks a few more minutes to type in more questions or comments into the the Q&A box. And again, please raise your hand, and I'm watching more closely now if you'd like to give a comment or ask a question. I'm just looking back through the Q&A too while folks are thinking about their last questions. One of our representatives from GCEA just wanted to mention that GCEA does offer a free test drive of their Chevy Bolt. So if you're curious about owning an electric vehicle, you can check out the link that Allie, I'm going to butcher her last name, Sahagan, I'm sorry if I did, posted in the Q&A box here. And then Gisa Michael with GVRHA is talking about some of the Energy Smart Colorado resources that they have available and tax incentives, energy and assessments. So take a look at those links that they shared too. And thanks for joining. Okay. It looks like we're starting to drop off with participants, and I don't see any more questions in the Q&A box or anybody with raised hands. So I'm going to go ahead and let you all go and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I just want to say a huge thanks for joining. We really appreciate it. This is not the end of the climate action plan, so please stay engaged. This is going to be a year-long process. So as Frank took note of, please stay engaged, visit our pages to find out how you can publicly get involved in the planning process, and we'll keep you informed of any larger opportunities to get engaged. So thank you all so much. Oh, let's see. Sorry, we have one more question. Since we're early, I don't want to not address it. So Frank said, I've recently become aware of the extent of direct and indirect subsidies provided to the fossil fuel industry. Is this a concern for the group? And Frank, I don't know if you're asking other folks on the call, but it is well known that the fossil fuel industry has been subsidized for a very long time, and that's why it's an affordable type of energy for us. I mean, it's always a concern to know where the government is deciding to subsidize with which industry. I don't think that's something that maybe the climate action plan can specifically implement, but we certainly can advocate as a local government where the money should be subsidizing. So, and Emily, I don't know if you have any final thoughts on that.
No, I think that's great. I think
Okay.
that's a really good point to bring up, Frank, that we've been heavily subsidizing the fossil fuel industry for so long, and we do not provide the same level of subsidies to renewable energy technology. So renewables have been facing this real uphill battle. Fortunately, it seems like we're finally at the point where things are evening out, but it's been really challenging over the last, forever up until recently.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks, Frank, so much for that. We'll call that the final comment, and I will let you all have a lovely afternoon. And Emily, thank you so much again. I'm already getting some text messages from folks saying Emily did such a wonderful job. So really appreciate you and taking the time to come speak to the community today.
Absolutely, anytime.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and stay tuned.
Thank you, everyone. Pleasure to have you.